I used to tell myself that marriage wasn't supposed to feel magical all the time, that comfort came with silence, and love could live in absence. I held on to that idea longer than I should have, especially after Daniel stopped noticing the small things, when I changed my hair, when I wore the dress he used to say he loved, when I set the table for 3 instead of 2 because he was always late. Over time, I stopped expecting anything. I gave up the hope of coming home to warmth and started accepting the chill as a permanent season in our house. Daniel wasn't cruel. That would have made it easier to name the pain. He was just gone even when present. His eyes were fixed on screens, deadlines, endless meetings. His words were functional. We need groceries. Did you sign the form? Jason's parent-teacher meeting is Thursday. I can't remember the last time he asked how I was or looked at me like he used to. And so I poured everything I had into Jason, my little boy. My anchor. Jason is 8, with a heart too big for his chest and questions too sharp for his age. He notices things. Not just butterflies or airplanes, but the way I pause before answering. The way I fake my smile. He doesn't say much, but sometimes he asks the kinds of questions that make me freeze. Like that morning on the way to the beach when he asked why Daddy never comes with us anymore. I lied and said Daddy was busy, but the truth sat heavy between us the whole ride there. I didn't expect much from the beach. Just a few hours under the sun, watching Jason run wild. I needed the salt air, the noise of the waves, something to drown out the noise inside me. Daniel was supposed to come, but canceled last minute. Another urgent client, another invisible wall between us. I didn't argue. I packed the bags, grabbed Jason's sunscreen, and left. When we got there, I let Jason run ahead, his laugh slicing through the air like a song I hadn't heard in a while. That's when I noticed the other boy slightly older, building something elaborate in the sand, and beside him, a man. Tall, easygoing, focused on the boys' tower like it was the most important thing in the world. They were laughing together. Not distracted. Not detached. Present. It took me a second to realize how long I'd been watching them. I felt something twist in my chest. Not desire. Not attraction. Just an ache. A longing. A contrast. That man, who I later learned was named Ethan, looked like someone who hadn't forgotten how to enjoy life. Jason wandered near their side, curious as always. I followed casually, not wanting to interrupt. The boys exchanged names. The man looked up and smiled at me, genuine, relaxed, not forced like the ones Daniel used when he remembered to try. We didn't speak long, just enough to exchange the basics. His tone was kind, no flirtation. No motive. But there was something in that short moment, some strange reminder that not everyone forgot how to connect. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become until that moment of not being invisible. I said goodbye and pulled Jason away, trying not to let the interaction linger. As we walked, Jason looked up and said, "You smiled different just now." I blinked, unsure. "At that man," he said. "You smiled at him different than when you smile at Dad." My breath caught. I laughed it off, ruffled his hair, told him he was imagining things. But inside I felt exposed. The way children see truth without filter or agenda can be disarming. He wasn't accusing me of anything, just noticing. But that noticing stayed with me. On the way home, Jason fell asleep in the car. Sand still stuck to his knees, salt crusted on his cheeks. I looked at him through the rearview mirror and wondered what he really saw when he looked at me. Did he know I was just going through the motions? Did he feel the absence of love in our home the same way I did? I wanted to believe I'd protected him from all that. But maybe I hadn't. Maybe silence speaks louder than I thought. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen heating leftovers while Daniel sat in the living room scrolling through emails. I tried to remember the last time we had a real conversation, one that wasn't about bills or school forms, or whether Jason had brushed his teeth. I couldn't. That realization hit harder than I expected. It wasn't the beach or Ethan or even Jason's comment that made me feel the gap. It was the quiet inside our home. A silence that had grown roots. Asterisk, I told myself again that it wasn't supposed to be magic all the time. But maybe it was supposed to be something more than just getting by. Maybe noticing the absence of warmth is the first step to realizing how cold you've become. And maybe, just maybe, smiling at a stranger doesn't mean you're unfaithful. It just means you remember what being seen feels like. It started with a message. Ethan found me through a mutual parenting group online. His text was light, casual. Ben says Jason's his new best friend. Looks like we're beach buddies now. I stared at it longer than I should have before replying. Not because it was inappropriate. It wasn't. It was just noticed. I wasn't used to being on someone's mind. I replied, keeping it friendly. But something shifted. Asterisk, the messages didn't stop. They came once a day, then twice. Still innocent. Still focused on the kids. But slowly, we drifted from discussing beach toys to favorite childhood memories, to books we were reading, to moments in our days that had nothing to do with parenting. I kept waiting for the line to blur, but it didn't, not at first. What caught me off guard was how much I looked forward to them. How I checked my phone more often. How his words made the silence in my house feel louder. Asterisk, Daniel didn't notice. He never asked why I was smiling at my phone. Never asked why I stayed up later, scrolling. His mind was always elsewhere. Work, screens, sleep. Our interactions were functional. What do we need from the store? Did you email the school? I couldn't remember the last time he asked me how I was feeling. I couldn't remember the last time I answered honestly anyway. Asterisk, a week later, I saw Ethan again. We were back at the beach, this time by chance. The kids ran ahead, already in sync like they'd known each other for years. Ethan and I stood back, a little awkward at first. He offered me coffee from a flask. I accepted. We talked about the weather, the tide, parenting. The conversation moved naturally, no effort. He listened in a way I'd forgotten people could. His eyes didn't dart to a phone. His responses weren't delayed or distracted. He was simply there. Asterisk, I told him about Jason's drawings, how he'd started sketching waves after our last visit. Ethan said that was beautiful. He said most people don't notice the things their kids are quietly trying to express. That hit harder than he knew. I wanted to tell him that I used to notice everything. That motherhood had kept me tethered when my marriage left me drifting. But I didn't say that out loud. Asterisk, he told me about his divorce. Calmly, without bitterness. Said they grew apart, but stayed respectful for Ben's sake. He said it with clarity, not shame. I admired that. I asked him if it was lonely. He said sometimes. But at least now, he wasn't pretending. That word stuck with me, pretending. I thought about all the mornings I woke up next to Daniel, both of us facing opposite directions, both pretending we were okay. Asterisk, the kids came running back, interrupting the moment. We laughed. He wiped sand off Ben's shirt. I brushed it from Jason's cheek. For a moment, we looked like something we weren't, something that made me ache in places I'd ignored for years. Asterisk, later that night, I found myself drafting messages to Ethan and deleting them. Not because they were wrong, but because I didn't trust the version of myself who needed to send them. I kept asking what exactly I was doing. Was I flirting? Seeking attention? Or was I just starving for connection in a life that had stopped offering any? Asterisk, I sat on the porch after Jason went to bed, reading our message thread from the beginning. It was all so harmless on the surface. But in between the lines, there were moments, tiny fragments of intimacy. Him telling me he hated eating dinner alone. Me replying that sometimes I cooked for 3, even when only 2 showed up. Him saying he admired the way I spoke about Jason. Me saying it was nice to be heard for once. It wasn't physical. But it was personal. Asterisk. A few days later, Daniel walked in while I was laughing at my phone. He asked what was so funny. I froze. I said it was just something in a parenting group. He nodded and walked away. I don't think he believed me. But he didn't ask again. That scared me more than if he had. I realized we were both quietly giving up day by day. I was emotionally elsewhere. And he didn't care enough to notice. Asterisk. Jason said something again that caught me off guard. We were walking home from school, and he said, "When you're happy, it makes the whole house feel better." I asked what he meant. He shrugged, said he could just tell when I wasn't. I didn't know how to respond to that. I just hugged him tighter. He was watching me more closely than I realized. Asterisk. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how easy it was to fall into this space with Ethan, how it started with something so small, and how it wasn't about sex or romance. It was about feeling seen, understood. I hadn't cheated, not technically. But I also knew I was no longer fully in my marriage. And that quiet shift, that emotional betrayal, felt heavier than anything physical ever could. It was supposed to be a normal afternoon. Jason was with my sister for the weekend, and I had the rare kind of quiet that felt unfamiliar. I took a walk, ended up near the beach again, not planning to run into Ethan. But there he was, sitting on the same bench, watching the tide. We smiled, said nothing at first. Then he patted the space next to him, and I sat without thinking too much. The wind was soft. The kind of quiet that asks questions you can't avoid. Asterisk. He asked if everything was okay. I didn't answer right away. I told him the truth instead. I said I felt like I'd disappeared. Like somewhere between being someone's wife and someone's mother. I stopped being someone at all. He nodded, not the kind of nod that tries to fix anything. Just one that says, "I hear you." That was all it took for something to crack open. Asterisk. I don't remember who leaned in first. Maybe we both did. But our faces were close enough to blur the line. It wasn't wild or impulsive. It was slow, quiet, charged, inches from a kiss. A breath away from something that would have changed everything. But I stopped. I pulled back. I whispered, "I can't." Not because I didn't want to. Because I knew what came next would define who I was, not just what I felt. Asterisk. Ethan didn't pressure me. He nodded again, softer this time. Sighed. He understood. He said he respected me for stopping. That he still wanted to be someone I could talk to. Not because he expected anything, but because it seemed like I hadn't had that in a long time. And he was right. Asterisk. I walked home slowly, unsure of what I was feeling. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't proud either. I just felt exposed. I had stood at the edge of something and chosen to step back. But that didn't mean nothing had happened. The line between betrayal and honesty isn't defined by action alone. It's drawn in silence, in what we withhold, in who we think about when we lie awake. I hadn't crossed a boundary with my body. But my heart had already wandered miles away. Asterisk. At home, Daniel was on the couch again, typing. I stood there for a moment, watching him, trying to remember what it was that used to hold us together. I sat across from him and said we needed to talk. He looked up, surprised. I told him I didn't feel connected to him anymore. That I wasn't angry, but I was tired of the distance. Tired of pretending things were fine when we both knew they weren't. Asterisk. He didn't interrupt. Maybe because deep down he knew. 2. I told him I didn't want to lie to myself or Jason. That I didn't want our son growing up thinking this was what marriage looked like. Not with silence, not with resignation. He asked if there was someone else. I told him the truth. I said there wasn't, not really. But I had started to remember what it felt like to be noticed. And that scared me more than anything. Asterisk. We didn't argue. He didn't beg or shout. Maybe he had drifted too, just in a different way. I told him I needed space. Not to run away, but to find myself again. To figure out what I even wanted from this life, from love, from myself. He nodded. Sighed. He understood. I believed him, even if neither of us knew what came next. A week later, I took Jason back to the beach. He ran into Ben like no time had passed. Ethan was there, but this time it was different. No lingering looks, no tension. Just two parents watching their kids and sharing the same air. We talked, but it was lighter now. I thanked him for listening, for not pushing, for being human in a moment when I needed that most. He smiled and said anytime. On the way home, Jason turned to me and said, "You seem better. Mom, you don't look tired anymore." I asked what he meant. He shrugged, said he didn't know. Just that I seemed more like me again. And that hit harder than anything. Because I didn't realize how far I'd drifted until someone else noticed I was back. At night, I lay in bed. Alone, no messages, no noise, just space. But it didn't feel empty. It felt necessary. I thought about how close I came to making a different choice, how easy it would have been. But I didn't, and that mattered. Because infidelity isn't always about crossing lines. Sometimes it's about recognizing them and choosing not to. Even when it hurts. Even when no one would know. The truth is, I didn't want a new love. I wanted to remember who I was before I forgot. And that starts now. It's strange how the aftermath feels quieter than the build-up. No dramatic fallout, no screaming matches or slammed doors. Just a slow shift in atmosphere, like something heavy being lifted from the room without anyone touching it. Daniel and I didn't become enemies. We didn't even become strangers. We just stopped pretending we were something we weren't. There were moments when we still operated like a unit, sharing updates about Jason, coordinating drop-offs, replying to the same school emails. But beneath all that, we both knew something had ended. Not with a bang, but with the quiet realization that we had let go long before we ever said the words out loud. I moved into a small apartment not far from the house. Nothing extravagant. Just enough for me and Jason to have a space that felt like ours. It had sunlight in the kitchen and a second-hand couch that Jason immediately claimed as his reading spot. The first few nights, the silence was loud. But it didn't carry guilt. It carried possibility. I didn't miss the silence between me and Daniel. I missed the version of myself that used to live without compromise. And now in this space, I had the chance to find her again. Jason adjusted quickly. Children do when the tension dissolves. He asked a few questions, why we weren't all living together, if Daddy was mad, if this was forever. I told him the truth, in ways he could understand. I told him grown-ups sometimes stop being happy together, but that it doesn't mean they stop being a family. That love changes, and that sometimes choosing peace is also choosing love. He nodded. That's all he needed. Ethan didn't become a chapter 1 ran to. In fact, I stepped away from him too for a while. Not because he did anything wrong, but because I needed space to make decisions without leaning on anyone. I needed to make sure I wasn't leaving one version of myself just to become someone else's reflection. I wanted clarity, not comfort. I wanted to stop confusing attention with affection. I wanted to feel whole alone before inviting anyone into the process again. I spent mornings making coffee without checking my phone. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. I went for walks, not to run away from thoughts, but to sit with them. I read books without skimming. I stopped filling silences with noise. In those moments, I realized how far I'd come from the woman who once mistook being needed for being loved. It was subtle but powerful. Rebuilding doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it's quiet discipline, choosing yourself in 100 invisible ways every day. There were days I missed Daniel, but not in the way people think. I missed the idea of him, the potential we once had. The life we tried to build when love was still loud and effortless. But I knew the version of us we clung to had expired a long time ago. We just hadn't acknowledged the expiration date. And staying for the sake of staying was no longer a kindness to anyone, not to me, not to him, not to Jason. Eventually, Ethan reached out again, a message asking how we were. I answered honestly. Said I was finding my rhythm, learning how to exist without anchoring myself to anyone else's tides. He respected that, didn't push. Said he was around if I ever wanted to talk. It wasn't romantic. It didn't need to be. Sometimes, connection exists in the quiet recognition that someone once held space for your truth without asking for anything in return. That mattered more than I could admit at the time. Months passed, the ache dulled. Not because I forgot, but because I forgave myself for staying too long, for almost stepping outside my vows, for putting my needs last, for believing that loyalty meant silence. I realized that infidelity doesn't always live in physical betrayal. Sometimes it begins when you stop being loyal to yourself, when you let your own happiness rot quietly in the name of appearances. That kind of betrayal is harder to see, but it leaves the deepest scars. Jason thrived. He laughed more. He asked fewer questions. He saw his parents trying not to return to each other, but to build something healthy around him. I took that as a sign that we'd done something right, even in all the ways we'd failed. Healing didn't come with a roadmap. It came in fragments, through self-awareness, hard conversations, quiet reflection, and showing up every day, even when it hurt. One evening, Jason sat beside me on the couch, his head on my shoulder. He whispered, "I like this version of you." I looked at him, surprised. He added, "You seem lighter now." And that's when I knew I had made the right choice. Not just leaving the marriage, but choosing the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. I didn't need a new love story. I just needed to end the one I was rewriting alone. I owed that to myself. Because infidelity isn't just an action, it's a symptom of distance, of silence, of longings denied and feelings buried. And healing isn't always staying faithful to someone else. Sometimes it's about staying faithful to the version of you that refuses to live unloved, unnoticed, or unspoken for.